The ninth generation of gaming. It has certainly been an interesting one. From the most decorated game of all time in Baldur's Gate 3 to steaming piles of dung like Lord of the Rings Gollum. But between the highs and lows of the games themselves, there's been many things changing throughout the industry. In this video, we'll be chronicling the turbulent ride that the video game space has been on since the release of the 9th generation consoles. Looking at everything from the epic failures to the ongoing culture war. And at the end, we'll attempt to answer a question that's been bubbling in the minds of many gamers. Has this been the worst console generation ever? To find out, we'll need to go back to the start of this generation in November 2020, and it started with absolute disaster. On November 10th, 2020, Xbox released their Series X and Series S consoles, and 2 days later, Sony followed suit and launched the PlayStation 5. All of this was right as the world was entering the global microchip shortage. Disruption caused in manufacturing by the COVID-19 lockdowns caused a worldwide shortage of chips, which impacted many industries from automobiles to household electronics and, of course, gaming. The consoles couldn't be manufactured anywhere near fast enough to keep up with demand, and for a couple of years the new consoles were like rocking horse shit. People who did manage to get consoles were either lucky enough to be at the front of a retailer queue or unlucky enough to have their pants pulled down by a scalper. Most people didn't get hold of the new consoles until 2022, almost 2 years after they released. But this wasn't the end of the world, as at that time there was hardly any reason to upgrade. Let's think back to the PS1 era. In terms of graphical quality, the jump to PS2 was probably the biggest I've seen in my lifetime. Just look at this comparison between Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2.
Impressive.
The original Xbox underwent a similar upgrade when the Xbox 360 came out, and we saw similar jumps in quality, although not as drastic as we moved up through the 7th generation and into the 8th. By this point, the PS4 and Xbox One era, graphics were looking pretty good.
Pretty good.
But the step up to the PS5 and Xbox Series X generation, it just wasn't that big of a difference, at least to begin with. This was made worse by the fact that virtually all of the new games that came out were made to be cross-generational, meaning you could play them on a Gen 9 or a Gen 8 console. And whilst this meant people could enjoy the new games even if they hadn't managed to get hold of a new console yet, it didn't exactly give people a reason to upgrade. On the PS5, the big exclusive game on release was Demon's Souls, a remake of an 11-year-old PS3 game. And for the next 2 years, the only PlayStation exclusive games that came out on the PS5 that weren't also available on the PS4 were Returnal, Deathloop, and Ratchet & Clank. And whilst they were all pretty well received, none of them were really blockbusters that made the PS5 a must-buy. And things weren't much different over at Xbox. The Series X didn't even release with an exclusive game, and instead just came with a few upgrades for existing Xbox One games. And in the first 2 years after its release, the only Series X games that couldn't also be played on an Xbox One were the new Flight Sim game, which most people play on PC, and The Medium, a decidedly average game that ran like an asthmatic bullfrog. So for the first couple of years that the new consoles were out on the market, there wasn't much of an incentive to buy them. But even if you decided you wanted to, your chances of getting one were slimmer than Guybrush Threepwood's ankles. However, as time went on, we did eventually get some big next-gen blockbuster games. But with the big blockbuster games came big blockbuster budgets, and oh boy, have we seen budgets climb to mind-boggling levels during this generation. GTA 6, if it ever gets finished, is estimated to have cost 2 billion smackaroos, making it the most expensive video game ever by some margin. But even the upcoming Gears of War E-Day is rumoured to have a development budget upwards of $400 million. To put that into perspective, the original Gears of War game only cost $12 million. And of course, there's been a boatload of inflation over that time, but not to the level that E-Day should cost over 33 times what the original Gears game did. If these figures are true, then it seems to me that E-Day will be up shit creek from the moment it arrives, because if it's selling for $80 a game, they're going to need to sell around 5 million copies just to break even. And a lot of players won't be buying copies of it because they'll be playing it through Game Pass. I might have to eat my words on that in a few months, but we'll see. These monster budgets and painfully long development cycles have been a big part of this console generation, but they've also been a big reason behind many of the failures. And man, there have been some big high-profile failures in this generation. Concord infamously became the biggest media project failure of all time, with the game being flushed down the shitter just 2 weeks after launch, despite an 8-year development cycle and an estimated budget of around $500 million. But more on that later. Highguard crashed and burned in a similar fashion after Jeff Keighley accidentally annihilated it at the 2025 Game of the Year Awards.
Welcome to Highguard.
$200 million budget, shut down after 45 days. The day before spent years building hype as the next big survival, zombie, extraction, MMO, whatever it was game, and at one point became the most wishlisted game on Steam, only to immediately die on release as it became widely agreed that the game was a total scam, amongst allegations of trademark disputes, assets being plagiarised, and employees not being paid. And Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League released to complaints of having a tired and dull formula and a pointless online battle pass system. It failed to meet sales expectations and caused a reported loss for Warner Brothers of $200 million. These are just some of the failures that have plagued this generation. As the gaming industry has continued to grow, so have the budgets, shareholders, and profit expectations. And it seems that for many of these projects, trying to recoup investments in the hundreds of millions just hasn't been possible with the products that they've been putting out. And this has led to another industry-wide issue that may come to define this generation: the mass layoffs. Epic Games cut over 1,000 employees, roughly 25% of its workforce. Ubisoft implemented widespread restructuring and multiple rounds of downsizing across all of its global studios. Riot Games laid off over 500 employees and closed the Riot Forge. Sony reduced its workforce numbers and closed historical operations like the Japan studio. Electronic Arts enacted multiple rounds of corporate restructuring and laid off over 2,000 members of staff. And Unity suffered deep organisation-wide reductions and studio closures. At the time of making this video, we are right in the middle of Microsoft layoffs, with ZeniMax and Bethesda union members protesting after being made redundant. Bethesda employees argue that with no devs, there'll be no games, and claim that they make games that define generations. Gamers who are critical of these devs argue that they deserve to be fired, as all they've put out in the last 11 years is Fallout 76, Starfield, and 2 Elder Scrolls mobile games, all of which they claim were utter dung. But another point of contention through this era between devs and gamers has been the trend of modern writing. And I think we might have Marvel movies to thank for this. Gamers have commonly been critical of writing practices coined as millennial slop. This includes quippy dialogue.
You're different.
You're a cube. Talking.
An abundance of sarcasm.
This is where I betray you. Seriously, can you imagine?
Using jokes to immediately break any tension.
Did I just do that?
And the inclusion of characters who are constantly obnoxious arseholes.
Let's get a look at you.
You were with Mimi, right?
At the car meet.
You don't look like much of a driver to me.
You heard what she said. You look like a hoe.
Many games have also come under scrutiny for including girl boss characters. A debate on this is ripping right now, as we've just had the Halo Combat Evolved remake drop, which includes a new female girl boss character.
Nice work.
Thanks. Spartans aren't the only badasses in the UNSC.
Some gamers argue that these characters are included purely to promote feminism and to tear down masculinity, whilst developers counter that it's necessary to show women in positions of power. But these arguments are part of a wider battle that's been raging on throughout this console generation, and that battle is for the culture. Ever since Gamergate in 2014, the video game space has increasingly become a battleground for the ongoing culture war. This war represents a deep ideological divide between industry creators driving for progressive evolution and segments of the player base demanding a return to more traditional entertainment values. This conflict has shaped how modern games are developed, marketed, and critiqued. And this debate has really ramped up since 2020. In the blue corner, you have the AAA video game developers. They argue that everything we do is political, and have been working to make games more inclusive by pushing for diverse characters, including varying ethnicities, body types, genders, and sexual orientations. Hypersexualized female character designs have been toned down to create what they claim are more realistic, nuanced, and relatable characters. And in the red corner, we have the dissident gamers, a vocal segment of the player base who view these industry shifts as progressive political ideologies being rammed down their throats.
So, I'm non-binary.
They argue that politics being pushed in games compromises the entertainment value, and view the racially diverse characters, the uglification of females, and the inclusion of gay and gender themes as forced diversity, driven by corporate quotas rather than organic storytelling. This ongoing debate led to several flashpoints during this console generation. Ubisoft found itself at the centre of an international political and historical shitstorm regarding Assassin's Creed Shadows set in feudal Japan. The decision to feature Yasuke, a black samurai of African origin, caused critics to accuse Ubisoft of forcing modern identity politics into Japanese history. Several promotional materials were heavily criticised for architectural and cultural inaccuracies, and online petitions called for the game's cancellation. The intense scrutiny forced Ubisoft to issue public apologies to the Japanese community, and the game faced multiple delays to fix the historical mistakes. This whirlwind controversy demonstrated the immense financial risk that the culture war scrutiny now carries for AAA studios. Stellar Blade's release became a battleground over physical attraction and censorship. The game's protagonist, Eve, was designed using a 3D body scan of a real-life Korean glamour model. Gamers championed the title as a triumph of traditional character design and a total rejection of the woke trend of uglifying female characters. The situation became bizarre when a day one patch modified a few of Eve's highly revealing outfits, and the same players who praised the game immediately accused Sony of forced censorship. And Concord became a landmark case study in how failing to gauge the cultural temperature correctly can result in commercial disaster. Launching into an oversaturated hero shooter market, Concord featured character designs heavily criticised by gamers, as being aggressively unappealing, lacking any interesting or coherent style, and instead being overtly focused on inclusivity. The game completely failed to find an audience, suffering historically low player counts before Sony sent it to the Shadow Realm just 2 weeks after launch. While analysts pointed to poor marketing and a crowded genre, the anti-woke community claimed the game's failure as a major validation of their slogan, "Go woke, go broke." This culture war has seen the AAA developers butting heads with the gamers for some time now, but the corporations have also done their fair share of headbutting the consumers. Since 2020, the consumer cost of video games has undergone its most aggressive increase in modern gaming history. For almost 2 decades, $60 was the unbreakable ceiling for a standard AAA video game. But this ceiling finally shattered as the industry prepared for the PS5 and Xbox Series X. The first to break the barrier was NBA 2K, announcing it would cost $70 on the next-gen consoles. And Sony immediately followed suit by announcing that the Demon's Souls remake would also be $70. EA, Ubisoft, and several of the other big publishers immediately adopted this as the new baseline price.
Adjustable rates, dog shit.
Xbox did hold out for a while before finally caving in 2023, when they dropped Starfield and Forza for $70. Even Nintendo jumped on the bandwagon by raising Zelda Tears of the Kingdom to $70, despite that being a previous-gen cartridge-based game. But as new players softened to the new prices, the publishers soon found a way to charge them $100 for Ultimate Editions, by leveraging everyone's fear of missing out. Exclusive skins, Battle Pass boosts, and early access to games a couple of days before the Standard Edition came out became the norm for most AAA releases. And just when you thought $100 games weren't greedy enough, Sony recently announced that from 2028 they will no longer be producing disc versions of any game, forcing players into a digital-only future. This sparked fierce debate amongst the player base, with many gamers concerned about how this will impact their future purchases, and whether buying will actually mean owning. However, some gamers who already only buy digital argued it will make no difference. But who better to explain why this matters than Sony themselves? Here's a video from the PS4 launch conference.
When a gamer buys a PS4 disc, they have the rights to use that copy of the game. They can trade in the game at retail, sell it to another person, lend it to a friend, or keep it forever.
So let's summarise everything we've talked about so far. This console generation has been bad for gamers because they're paying higher prices, losing physical media, and have had their games impacted by politics. It's been bad for the developers because half of them have been fired, and it's been bad for the publishers because they've lost a shit ton of money. It seems pretty bleak, doesn't it? However, there have been a couple of successes this generation. We've seen a big return of handheld gaming, with many portable consoles coming out like the Steam Deck, Asus ROG Ally, and a wide array of pocket devices, offering everything from retro experiences to high-performance gaming on the move. And the other major success in this generation has been indie games. Since 2020, we've seen a huge boom in the indie space. Whilst AAA studios chased profits and political messages, indie games chased creativity, and they absolutely smashed it. This generation, we've had a veritable cornucopia of awesome and creative indies. Titles such as Hades, Valheim, Balatro, Vampire Survivors, Hollow Knight, Inscription, Dredge, Dispatch, the list goes on. Friend slot games have been hugely popular amongst streamers and players, with games like Lethal Company, Repo, and Mecha Chameleon being massive hits. And cozy games have exploded in popularity and become a major market segment, thanks to indie successes like Unpacking and Power Wash Simulator. I've recently made a video on this, I'll link it at the end if you're interested. This console generation has definitely had its ups and downs, but will it be remembered as a time that creativity blossomed, or a time where the industry turned on its consumers? I guess we'll wait and see. Let me know what you think in the comments. Has this been a good era for gaming, or has it been the worst generation ever? Please like and sub if you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.